Hey, and welcome to my session of today. My name is Benedikt Bergmann, and I want to talk about ALM for the Power Platform. First of all, I want to thank our sponsors. Without them, it wouldn't be possible for us to be here or then be on place as well. So first of all, we have the online streaming sponsor, which is Proximo 3, and then we have the digital sponsors, which is Loke, Codera, Riada, and Qubic. And then there are other sponsors as well for the in-person event. Then I want to introduce myself for those of you who don't know who I am, which will be a lot. As mentioned, my name is Benedikt Bergmann. I'm CEO of CRM Consultana in Germany and solution architect for the Power Platform and Dynamic 365 CE, how it is or was called. But I started out as a .NET developer, so I have a development background, C# development for customers, and then added Angular and React and so on. Later on was thrown into a Dynamics on-prem 2011 project. And I stuck to the platform and do it until today. Then I also on the screen, you can see some contact details. So if you want to get in touch with me afterwards, if you have any questions, just feel free to write me in like LinkedIn or Twitter or GitHub or an email. And to make that a bit easier, I also have like a link on bio.link. So if you scan the QR code, you get to my page there, and then you have all the links to my contact information. So as mentioned, feel free to contact me and ask questions about ALM. So let's come to the chase. In today's session, we will talk about what is ALM and the basics for the Power Platform to get us all on the same level, like what are solution, environment. Then we will talk a bit about the difference between Power Platform pipelines, ALM accelerator, and ADO pipelines, or in that case, could be applied to GitHub Actions as well. The second part will be, we will take a look at the basic ALM process, so to say. So what, how does that look like, and which steps do you need to implement? And then we will have a demo and actually try to implement that as well. I've prepared some pipelines, and we try to set them up and make them work against my demo, dev, and test environments. So let's get started with the first part, which is what is ALM? First of all, I have like a little sentence from Tesh Target, which describes what it is. So it's application lifecycle management is an integrated system of people, tools, and processes that supervises software application from its initial planning and development through testing and maintenance and into decommission and retirement. So why do I have this statement here? I want to highlight that it's important that application lifecycle management is more than just the automated deployment part. So the application lifecycle management is the complete lifecycle from planning through develop, testing, deployment, and over maintenance, again, starting the cycle for the next version of the software. And at the end, a software might be decommissioned or will be decommissioned at some point in time. So it's important to know that, and it is more than just the deployment part. Even so, we often, and also in this session afterwards, or what is coming next, we only will talk about the deployment part, because that's the part which we can automate the most, and which is mostly like not related to circumstances you have in your project or in your setup, because like to plan stuff and to develop stuff and test stuff as well as maintain, that's highly related to how your setup looks like, which developers do you have, or which customers do you have, and how do your team look like, which tools do you use for that, and so on. The deployment part, that can be automated and also be like done in a dynamic way, so that you can reuse it in different different projects. So we internally, for example, we have a template project where we have like pipelines set up, and we just can reuse them, or we will reuse them for all our projects without the need of redoing them all the time. So we will mostly talk about deployment, but it is more than just deployments when you talk about application lifecycle management. And then there is another one of those circles, which comes from the Microsoft documentation, because Microsoft thinks a bit different here. So they have like the first 4 steps are the same, but then they split up maintain to operate and monitor. I think it's good to know that if you look at the Microsoft documentation, there might be a different circle than everywhere else when you talk about ALM. So just that you have seen that. So why should we use ALM? It's to increase visibility into your workflow. And that's because let's imagine you don't have a proper application lifecycle management process set up. So everything is done manually, and only 1 or 2 people know how it really works. Then it's very like a hidden secret, so to say. So if one of those 2 get sick and the other one is on vacation, no one can deploy because the workflow isn't clear to everyone. But if you have a proper ALM process, and a proper ALM process could also be that you have a manual process, which is okay, but documented and written down. I would always recommend to have an automated process, but even a manual process could be like a proper ALM process. But either way, if you have one which is documented, and the best case is like in pipelines, be it in one of the 3 we have at our hands, and we will take a look at those later. Someone who's coming to the project or tries to deploy stuff, they can take a look at your workflow or your pipelines and see what are those doing and what are the steps. So they get more visibility into how your ALM workflow is working. The second part is you can have enhanced compliance, and that's both for like internal requirements as well as laws, for example. And that's if you take an example, is GDPR, which we all have to comply to and have challenges with from time to time. There's one thing if you, for example, want to have more testable data in your test and dev environments, then usually, or before GDPR, we have copied from production down, which is not optimal any longer, since you might not have the like you might not be allowed to use the actual user data in like another environment than production. So what you can do with pipelines is then you have a way of anonymization and like changing the actual data to something which isn't relatable to the person in an automated way, which makes your ALM process more compliant. And the third part is faster deployments, and that's the actual import if you go through the UI compared to if you go through a pipeline is nearly the same. So the pipeline, depending on which configuration you have, but might be slightly faster. Or there are 1 or 2 configurations where it might be very much faster, but normally the import time is nearly the same between UI and the pipeline. But if you do it manually, you usually go to your development environment, click export and click through the wizard, and then it takes some time until the pipeline or the solution is exported. In that time, we usually do other stuff, take a coffee or a break in general, which might take longer than the export. So it waits a bit until you're back and then press the download button and deploy it to the next environment. So this waiting time can be optimized if you have it in pipelines, because the next step in the pipeline will start immediately when the step before that is ready. So you usually get a faster deployment as well. And then you increase the quality of your product. And that's mostly because if you automate stuff and you have like a pipeline set up, it will do all the steps in the same order every time you run the pipeline. If you do it manually, it could be that you miss some parts, or someone is doing it maybe a slightly different way than another person. So overall, it's usually better to automate stuff because they will be executed in the exact same manner, and then with that you will have a higher quality in your product. And there is also another thing is in your pipeline automation, you could have quality gates like I want to run my unit tests before I deploy, which you usually don't do if you do it manually. And then the part because that's why I have some space in between, it's like you get some automation, which basically is like a combination of all the four like points in before that, because if you have it automated, you can achieve all those 4 points, which we have talked about. And then another thing is you overall minimize manual work and then thereby increase quality. That's usually why it's good to have an ALM process. So let's talk about some basics for the Power Platform so that we are all like on the same page. The solutions, which is a very important part of ALM, and those are only containers. So which means if you have like a component which is in 2 solutions, A and B, and you change something on the field, then it will be changed in both solutions. So if you have a component in several different solutions and you change this component in one solution, it will be also changed in the other solution. Then we should never use include all components, and there we have some exceptions for it. But include all means if you add like a table to a solution, you can select like include metadata or include all components or subcomponents. We should never do that. That will lead to errors. There is the exception that if you're creating your own tables, so custom tables, they have to be included with every or all the components in the first solution they will be installed with. Otherwise, your import can or will fail. So it mostly is like a general recommendation or best practice for out-of-the-box tables, which come from Microsoft, so contact and account and so on. So because if you take a look at that, let's say we have an ISV solution which we have managed in our environment, and we have an own solution which is managed like in test, and I have the contact entity which include all components. It will also include the ISV view which came with the ISV solution, and to a certain degree. And if the ISV then decides on I want to delete this view, and you install a new version, there might be errors because you have dependencies. ISV view has dependencies to your own solution, so you have to clean it from there first before you can uninstall the ISV solution. So this will then lead to a dependency error. So we don't want to include out-of-the-box tables with all components. Only include those that you really changed. A solution only contains customizations. But what does that mean? A customization is either like tables, fields, business rules, basically everything you can do in the Maker portal. Data, on the other hand, is table rows. So like Max Mustermann as like a row in the contact table. So you can't add like Max Mustermann to your solution. You can only add the table definition, but not a specific row. There are some exceptions to that. For example, environment variables and duplication detection rules are basically just rows in a table, but Microsoft has made them solution aware. So even so, those are basically just data, you still can add them to your solution, which makes it easier to move them from one environment to the other, obviously. And then when it comes to solution, we have stuff which is like purpose and supplier separation and pub patching and cloning, whereas you have to look how you separate your solutions. And I have another slide on that, but the general documentation or recommendation, is have as few solutions as possible. Don't split them just for the sake of splitting solutions. And then we can patch or clone a solution, which is basically more like an old thing we had from the old portal or the legacy UI, but we still can do it in Maker as well. But patches, it's not recommended to use patches any longer. They were created to have a workaround around the poor solution import time Microsoft had, or the Dataverse had, especially at Dynamics 365, 2011, 2013, 2016 as well era. But now, since like a year or two, Microsoft has invested a lot of money and time into optimizing everything around ALM, and it has gotten very much better. So we don't need that workaround any longer. And if you look at deployment automation, patches are very hard to handle because every patch you create is basically a new solution. So they get a new schema name. And since we have to configure like the schema name to decide on which solution we should export, we always have to, if you're using patches, we would always have to change our pipelines because it's a new solution basically. Then there are other problems like if you store them in the exported solution into your source control, which you should do. We'll take a look at that a bit later. But then you will get a new folder for every patch, which is like cluttering your source control. And the third thing, which usually is a problem, that if you try to install a patch to a target environment, the patch has to be created on the same base version as already is installed in the target environment. And since that usually doesn't match because development is you can't even install the patch. So there are some problems with patching, and you shouldn't use it, and it's not recommended from Microsoft any longer either. So next is when it comes to solution, we have something which is unmanaged and managed. What does that mean? We have unmanaged solution on the one hand, where we can add components, we can remove components, and delete components from this from the solution. So we can delete components from the environment which are like within such an unmanaged solution. We can export the unmanaged solution both as managed and unmanaged. And if the unmanaged solution is deleted, the underlying or containing components will not be uninstalled. So they will be still in the environment, even so they might not be part of a solution. So it makes it harder to find them, to really know which configuration or customizations you have. Managed, on the other hand, if you install like a solution as managed, you are not able to add components or remove components from it. It cannot be exported. And if you delete the managed solution, it will uninstall the components in the solution. There's also exceptions to that. If a component is part of a different solution from the same publisher, then it will not be deleted. It still stays in the environment, but otherwise it will be deleted, which is a good thing because then you can clean up your environment. So let's say you have, and that's a recommendation from Microsoft as well, development environment is with unmanaged solution because you have to add components and so on. And then test and production should be, or every other environment should be managed. So if you then decide on like, we don't need this field any longer, or we don't need this flow any longer, you just delete it from your unmanaged solution in dev. And if you do the next upgrade, it will be like automatically deleted from production as well, or test, or the target environment, which makes it convenient to clean up environments, because you don't have to remember which components do I have to delete after I have deployed, because you can just do it within the deployment. Then when it comes to the solutions, we also have something which is called layering, which is important to know about, because we sometimes have problems with it, and Microsoft is planning on changing that a bit. But in basically you have, for every managed solution you have installed in your environment, you get like a new layer. So you have lowest layer is the default solution, or the CDS solution, and then you have all the managed solutions on top. And every layer the order of those layers is based on when the solution was first installed. So let's say in this setup here, we have solution A and solution B. If I now install a new version of solution A, it will not change the layer. It will just stay there because solution A was installed the first time. And then on top, you have an unmanaged customization layer, where all unmanaged customizations are in, no matter with which solution they have come into the environment, or if you have done them manually. And the last one who has been installed or changed wins over the other ones. Whereas with the managed solution, so if let's say solution A and solution B, they contain the same component, like a view for contact, then the changes on B will override the configuration that A has. In certain ways, they will be for certain components they will merge, but otherwise they will override each other. Which makes it, if you really understand that, it makes it easier to us to predict what will happen in the target environment, because we know in which order we have installed the solutions first, or in which order we have installed them, so we can decide on which solution is winning over another solution, which is convenient, especially if you have ISVs, or third-party solutions, and different developer teams internally, which are building on the same implementation. You want to know, okay, the changes that team B is doing is always winning above the changes from team A, for example. Whereas if you have everything unmanaged, that is not always the case. It's more the case that the one who was installed last is winning. And there could be problems with that as well. For example, if Microsoft introduces a new solution, which happens quite often, especially in Dynamics 365 customer insight journeys, so marketing basically, those are like a lot of different solutions, and Microsoft sometimes does a restructure or adds a new solution. If the solution is then installed with a new environment, it layers on top of your solution, because it's a new solution and the install date is after your solution was installed first, which means the changes in this solution could win above your solution or your changes. And Microsoft, as far as I know, is working on that, so that Microsoft solutions always layers on bottom, and then ISV, and then your own solutions. But at the moment, that could be a problem. But there is a workaround for that. So if you have identified something like that, then it could be resolved. The next thing I want to mention is solution structure. As I mentioned earlier, it's recommended to have like as few solutions as possible. It best would be like a single solution, and that's because Microsoft has improved import speed so much within the last year or so. For example, I was able to bring down the import speed of one of my customers from usually 70 to 80 minutes, which we had before, and then we used the right configuration after Microsoft has done some changes, we could come down to like 5 minutes or so, with the same solution, same components and so on, which is quite nice, because now we can do our deployments during like lunch break, and we don't have to wait until after 5 p.m. when everyone has gone home, which makes it like more convenient for us and cheaper for the customer, because they don't have to pay like overtime, and we can just deploy the whole solution and don't have to split them up, just to be to have faster imports, because we have just changed some parts here or there, which makes it easier to handle and easier to manage. But there might be that you need multiple solutions, and Microsoft's recommendation is that you should have only one unmanaged solution per environment, which is a bit challenging, because if you create a lot of different environments, you have to sync them, and also it will cost some disk space. So we often have just one dev environment, and if the solutions are very, if they don't have any overlap, then it might be okay to have several solutions, unmanaged solutions in one dev environment, but you have to be sure that they don't overlap in like components. And scenarios where it's needed to have different solutions, that's, for example, if you have a custom connector, because the import will try to install flows first, but if a flow is using the custom connector and the custom connector isn't in the environment yet, the import will fail because we have a missing dependency, even so the custom connector is contained inside the solution. Like the import order is the wrong way. So we have to have custom connectors in a different solution, install that first, and then we can use or install the flows that are using the custom connector. Another one is like SLAs, so service level agreements, which are a normal out-of-the-box capability of Dynamics. They need to be in an own solution with all the components needed for that. Otherwise, the import could fail, and especially they will be turned off after every import. So you don't want to import this solution too often, because they don't change so often. And a third one might be, for example, the automatic record creation rules, so ARCs. They need to be like, all the components for that need to be in one solution. Otherwise, it will fail as well. And if there is too much around in the same solution, it won't install properly either. So there are reasons where multiple solutions are needed, and okay, but it's recommended to have as few as possible. If you have multiple solutions, it's important to look on like the publisher of solutions, and it should be the same publisher across your solutions, which makes it then easier if you have to move components between solutions. That's easier if the solutions had the same publisher, more or less. And then there are basically two different ways how you could structure your solution and split them if you like want to do that. That's either horizontal or vertical, or a combination. And what that is, like according to Microsoft documentation, is if you look at horizontal, that's like a solution per functional area, for example. So it could be that you have like a main solution, which contains like the tables and the choices and so on. Then you have maybe a security role solution, a report solution, and process and plugins, where you have all your plugin assemblies and processes and plugin steps and so on. So with that, you might be able to just deploy parts of your implementation, but it increases your management. And then on the other hand, you have vertical, which is components of sorry, that's the wrong way around. The horizontal is components of same type, and then vertical is per functional area. So that would be, for example, if for a different department. So you have, for example, one solution which is for the sales department and another solution which is for the marketing department, but they could contain the same component types. And this usually is even harder to manage because they usually have cross dependencies, because nearly all departments need like account and contact. And if the same table is in different solutions, you really have to be like certain and sure which parts of this table are you including, that you don't include the same thing in several solutions. Otherwise, you create like cross dependencies and so on. So that's very hard to manage. So the recommendation is to don't split them just for the sake of splitting it. Have as few as possible, as mentioned. I mentioned update and upgrade earlier. So if you install a solution to an environment, you can either do that via an update or an upgrade. An update is possible for both managed and unmanaged solutions. It installs new components and updates existing components. An upgrade, on the other hand, is only possible for managed solutions, and it installs new components and updates existing components as an update, but it will also uninstall components that have been deleted from the solution, as I mentioned earlier. And it's only available if the version you're trying to install is higher than the version that is already in the system and it's managed. Then you can do an upgrade. Basically, yeah. And that's the one which you will use or should use to clean up your downstream environments. When it comes to environments, we need we usually have a minimum of development, test, and production. That's what we require from our customers. And in addition to that, you could have more, which is, for example, evaluation. And that's used for, as you might know, Microsoft is releasing two waves of new versions for the Power Platform every year. One starts in April and one in October. And it's called a wave because new functionality can come from like then in April and 5 months forward. Then you have 1 month where basically no new functionality is coming, but maybe security updates. And then in October, that all starts again. So in October is the first release of the second wave, which will give you new features until like end of March, basically. Oh no, end of February, sorry. So you have 2 months where no new functions do arrive. Otherwise, they might arrive weekly. But on those waves, like the first big installation, which is in April and October, will contain or should contain all the functionality which is affecting your end users immediately without you as an admin having the option to like deactivate it or come around it. So yeah, it's affecting end users directly. And since that could like break your implementation, if they change something for the end user which you can't opt out, they give you a period where you can test it. And so they have something which is the early access. So 2 months before the new release or the wave is starting, so in February, for example, they usually activate the early access for the upcoming wave. And you can install it or activate it in your environment and then test your implementation again and see whether you have some stuff which isn't working any longer. But since you're testing stuff, you shouldn't do that directly in production, because otherwise production will break in the worst case. So you want to do that in a different environment. But you shouldn't do that in dev either, because, and that I had, it might break your deployment to downstream environments, because Microsoft might introduce new tables which add a dependency which aren't they are in test and production. So you can't move your solution any longer to test and production properly. Therefore, you can have an evaluation environment. You copy your dev environment over there, activate the early access. You can test through your whole implementation. If you find something, you can fix it. And then if you're certain that everything is still working, you can activate the early access in dev, test, and production so that your deployment is still working. Another usual thing that is a surrounding environment is PT, which is performance tests, if you want to run those against your implementation. And very common is hotfix environment, which is the only exception to everything which isn't dev should be like managed solutions, because the hotfix should be unmanaged as well. And then if you have like an error in production, you spin up a hotfix environment, deploy the same version you have in production, but as unmanaged to this environment, fix your stuff, deploy it to prod, change in dev, and then the hotfix environment can be killed again, basically. And usually, sometimes we have like, I'm working for a consultancy, that's why it's called internal dev. Sometimes we have customers that would like to do parts of the implementation themselves. But it could be like different development teams in the same company. So what you could do in that case, you have one development environment, then you have another internal development environment where the second team is working on, and then test and production, and to deploy like the one solution from dev as managed to internal dev, and then you have a second solution where they are doing their changes on top of yours, and then you deploy both of those solutions to test and production. You could also have like functional separation, which is, for example, sales and marketing have different environment pipelines, or different countries have different environment pipelines, and that could be combined, where like only the data has to be separated, but not the functionality. Then you might have like same development environment and deploy it to 2 tests and productions, because then you're certain that the data is separated, but the functionality will be exactly the same. Or you combine those as you wish. The last part in this part of the presentation is comparing pipelines, because pipelines is not the same as pipelines. Microsoft has introduced, as you might know, something which they call Power Platform pipelines. Until that point, when we talked about pipelines, we usually meant Azure DevOps pipelines or GitHub Action workflows. Something which is like full-blown pipelines where you can handle whatever you want to. If you now talk about pipelines, that might be Power Platform pipelines. So if a colleague or a customer mentions pipelines, I usually ask whether they mean Power Platform pipelines or Azure DevOps pipelines. But because they are very different and they are not at all the same. But we have something which is built into the platform and is getting better and better by the day. I have two customers, I think, which are using Power Platform pipelines. Works good. It depends a bit on the requirements and on the size of the project. I usually use them mostly for those projects where we really only have one solution, and like with a bit lower requirements. Maybe the customer doesn't even have like an Azure DevOps yet, and so on. So there we can use Power Platform pipelines, and we can like add more kind of functionality. For example, for the one customer, I still like in between the steps, I still trigger an Azure DevOps pipeline to export a solution and store it in my source control. And then it goes further with the Power Platform pipeline. And the good thing is that the user which runs the pipeline doesn't have to leave like the maker portal. They can just be there and use the UI they're used to, which makes it easier for them, especially if they like a citizen developers and not pro devs, which maybe don't have access to Azure DevOps or so on. Then the next step, which is a bit more complex and a bit more like configurable, is the ALM accelerator from the PowerCat team. It's basically a canvas app where you can handle your deployments and start it and so on. It's okay to set up. It also uses Azure DevOps pipelines in the background, and some of the functionality from that will over time move to the Power Platform pipelines instead. And then we have like Azure DevOps pipelines or GitHub Actions or GitHub Action workflows, which are basically full blown. You can do whatever you want to. You can even in the same pipeline deploy to like your Azure resources, Azure functions, also on Logic apps, and handle everything you have in your implementation at the same time. Whereas Power Platform pipelines and ALM Accelerator only have Power Platform components. There are some limitations for solutions, which is like embedded or deployments, which is embedded canvas apps. They are not very good to deploy. SLAs and ARC, we have talked about custom connectors as well. Custom tables must be included first with all the components. Service endpoints are a bit hard to handle because the secret won't be exported, and so you have to add them with a new step, manual script basically. So let's go to the basic ALM process. The prerequisites I usually have for that is you have an Azure DevOps project or a GitHub project. You have installed the Power Platform build tools in your Azure DevOps. You have an application registration, and you have created connections to dev and test. And we can take a look at that in the demo. Then we have two different approaches which we can choose, either source code centric approach or the environment centric approach. There can also be a combination of both. So the source code centric approach, there you have like the source code, which is your source of truth, basically. On the environment centric approach, the dev environment is your truth. So the environment-centric approach is easier to set up and usually the standard. So if you start a new project, you create a dev, test, and production, you do your changes in dev, you have a solution, it will be deployed to test as managed and then to production as managed. Problem is if your dev environment gets corrupted somehow or gets old, which means over time you usually do stuff in dev to make a POC or test out stuff, and then you don't go through with it, but some remains are there, which clutter the environment and can affect other stuff later, like if you do certain configurations. But they are not deployed to test and production, so they get out of sync. So with the source code-centric approach, which is a bit more complex to set up, but it's more flexible, and you can like get rid of the development environment and just create a new one to like get rid of the old configuration, which has over time has grown probably. And then also it makes branching possible, which is a usual thing for every other development, where you have feature branches and a branch mapped to an environment and so on, which is possible with the source code centric approach. Or as mentioned, there might be like if you have a combination of both. So the pipelines we would need to implement the source code centric approach, which is my recommendation to use, is we need an export from dev, which can be run frequently. And everything that does is just it takes an export from dev and unpacks the solution and saves it into our repository, basically. The next one would be a build solution, and then we have a release. So the first pipeline we have export from dev. It should do an export from dev, as mentioned. It will unpack the zip file and checks it into our repository, into the branch. The second one basically takes everything from source control and packs it together to a solution again, and then stores it as an artifact of the solution. So the first one can be run frequently, several times a day, or whenever you do like a pull request or anything like that. The second one will be run whenever you want to do a new deployment. And that's like the basic setup. Later, you can add in here that you have quality gates in between, like running your automated tests or running the solution checker or something like that, but also injecting your pro code stuff like plugins and web resources from your repository, so that you always have the correct version, basically. And the third one is the release one, which gets the artifact from the second one and deploys it to test and production and any other downstream environment. So let's take a look at the demo. Let's switch to my browser here. So here we are in Entra ID. I just wanted to show that really quick, because here are the app registrations on the left side, and you can create a new app registration, and those are used to deploy, and they need to be added as a user in your environment, and you have to give it access, and then the pipeline can access your environment to import and export the solutions. So if we go to my environment here, we have a demo solution which we want to deploy, basically. So in my Azure DevOps, I have a demo project. I have set up 2 service connections, one to dev and one to test, which we'll use. They are going to my dev and my test environment. They are using the service principal to connect to. The test one is even using managed identity, so I don't need a key. And the dev one is using the key, so I could test both versions. How to set them up would be maybe a session for itself, but I have a blog post on that, so you can take a look there. And then in the repository we have basically 3 pipelines. One is the export, one is the import, and export, build, and import. And now we want to create those. So we create a pipeline. We choose Azure repository, demo, existing pipeline, and then we use. Oh, sorry, I selected the wrong repository. Yeah, so path, and then we use like export, continue, and this one has everything we need. It's the solution name, and it will export, install the tooling, and publish customization, does an export, checks against the solution checker, even does another export as managed, does an unpack, and then commits everything to my repository. So we run that. So in the meantime, we can create the second one, new pipeline again, Azure demo, existing, and we select the build, continue. So this one is rather easy. It has like the solution name as a variable as well. It will install the Power Platform tooling. It will do a pack solution, and then it will publish the artifact, so that our managed solution is the artifact. And here you can already see, like I have in both of them, I have a variable solution name. So this could be done then with sharing variables between pipelines to optimize it, so you don't have to change the solution name in different parts. Oh yeah. So let's go to. Let's rename those. We will do this one is the build, and this one is the export. So this one isn't ready yet. So let's just create the third one then. This, and then the demo existing, and we take the import. And here we have to change, no, build, that's okay. So we have like the build pipeline as a resource. So it takes that as the base, solution name again, and then it basically just installs the Power Platform installer and imports the solution with a certain configuration. And those pipelines I have in one of my GitHub repositories as well. So there you can copy it from there. So let's see what happens here.
Was hier steht.
Now we wait. So now we can see that this solution ran through. So if you go to repositories, Power Platform solutions, we now have like our demo solution, and there you have an environment variable in there, which is like the only component we have in this demo solution. So next pipeline would be to run the build solution, or the build pipeline, sorry. Run. Let's see. Line 20. Good. So let's run the build pipeline. Which should be fast because it's not accessing actually the Dataverse environment. It just does stuff within Azure DevOps. Oh, wait, yes. Sorry.
Mal machen und ja, ich müssen halt ja, gut. Ja, liegen wir drin.
So try to run the build. It should be quite fast because it only does stuff within Azure DevOps and doesn't connect to Dataverse. And it has created one artifact. So if you go there, you have demo solutions managed here, zip file. So now we can also run this one, which you can rename to release, for example. Save. And this one takes like the exported or created zip file and should deploy it to test. Yes. So we can run that. Permit, which now should deploy our solution to our test environment. With that, our demo is ready. So thank you for listening and listening in. If you have any further questions, feel free to contact me. If you scan the QR code, you can come to, or you will come to my contact details. And have a nice rest of Scotch Summit, and see you soon.